Are you happy with Washington telling your state how to keep you safe at work? Some Republicans in Congress are not. Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number, where we break down legislation that's shaping and sometimes shaking the country. Today, we're tackling a bill that could fundamentally change workplace safety in America, the Nullify Occupational Safety and Health Administration Act, better known as the NOSHA Act. It's a bill that aims to completely abolish OSHA, the federal agency responsible for workplace safety since 1970. Before we dive into this bill, let's set the stage. So, welcome, Stephen, to our lovely
Hello.
Podcast. And Stephen, for anyone who hasn't heard of what OSHA is or taken a workplace safety training course, what is OSHA and what does it do?
Well, that's a very good question. I think there are probably very, very few people who haven't had to take some kind of workplace safety training course because they're pretty ubiquitous these days for very good reasons, as we'll explain. So OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and it's the federal agency that enforces workplace safety laws and standards. So very simple. Its goal is very simple: to ensure that workers have a safe and healthy work environment. So it covers everything from preventing exposure to toxic chemicals to ensuring construction workers have proper fall protection. And since it was created back in 1970, workplace deaths have dropped dramatically from around 14,000 per year back then to only 5,283 in 2023, despite the fact, obviously, that the workforce is much, much larger today than it was back then. But it's probably worth noting that is still 5,000 dead people every year who are just trying to do their jobs. So there's still progress to be made, right?
Yeah.
Workplaces always have those little signs saying how many days since the last accident. And what you want is no accidents, right? And no people dying in the workplace. Because when you go out to work in the morning, you shouldn't say, oh, well, I wonder what my chances are of making it home alive today, unless you're in the kind of job where that's expected, right? Most jobs shouldn't be dangerous.
The most dangerous jobs in the world are oil tankers and the people that scale the poles to change out light bulbs for other types of power things.
Most dangerous job, most dangerous profession, taxi driver. Always has been, probably always will be, taxi driver. Now, of course, that's sort of facing violent death, being attacked or whatever in your workplace, which obviously doesn't happen in most workplaces. But yeah, taxi driver. More dangerous than being a police officer.
Oh my gosh. Well, you learn something new every day. Well, okay. So this seems like a very important thing that we have here in the States. And with our international savant over here, do you all have one of these in the UK?
We do. But one interesting little fact, perhaps not hugely important, is that we would never refer to safety and health. We would always refer to health and safety. It's always that way around. It sounds very odd to my ears saying it the other way around. So our agencies are all called the Health and Safety Agency to protect health and safety. And a very common phrase you hear is, this particular thing that's really annoying me is health and safety gone mad. Very common expression because there's a general feeling that health and safety has gone too far and that there's all these pettifogging rules and regulations that stop people doing their job, that just get in the way of people going around their everyday lives, and that it's all very frustrating. But the thing about health and safety, of course, is that it's absolutely crucial to keeping people safe at work. And you have to have rules, you have to have rigid regulations that everybody must follow to the letter. Otherwise, people won't, because people are human beings, right? And none of us are perfect. There'll always be times when you won't do something completely right, or you'll cut some corners because you're in a hurry. And before you know it, you've lost all your fingers in a machine or something, because that's what used to happen. It doesn't happen very much now because all machines have these guards around them, which probably make it more difficult to use the machine, probably slows it down, decreases productivity. But it means that workers leave at the end of the day with all their fingers. And that's the key thing.
And do you think that there might be an aspect of that approach and feeling, and that a lot of the rules haven't actually caught up with the technological advancements? So maybe there's some really annoying processes that people are still being required to do, and they're really unneeded because the machine does have, the light touch sensor or whatever. We have a table saw, and it's this table saw where if it senses a finger, it stops, and so it won't cut your fingers off. And we tested it with a hot dog because, we're not going to put our own fingers on there. But it was crazy to see how amazing this saw is. And I mean, it was a more expensive saw than any of the other ones that you can get at kind of a Home Depot, but it was accessible to us as individuals who were remodeling our house and creating cabinets from scratch. But I wonder if that is part of people's gripe, is that maybe it was super dangerous. We put in all these processes to try to fix what was happening and people losing all their fingers. And then technology caught up when technology originally wasn't catching up, and we were having to fix the people. And now maybe
now the rules don't match. Yeah. So there's a really good, very current example that illustrates this very, very well. And that's to do with driverless cars. Driverless vehicles. Now, in particular, to do with autonomous trucks. So America is famous for its trucks and these huge, massive trucks and what they call them, road trains and things, where loads and loads of different carriages and things, crisscrossing the country, carrying things. It's very much part of like American culture, American life, this idea of trucking, right?
Yeah, because we don't have trains.
But yeah, absolutely. But it's also very expensive, right? And it's very difficult to find drivers, shortage of drivers, all of these kind of things. So companies are very keen at the moment to move to adopt this new technology and have driverless trucks. Now, the thing is, there are all sorts of health and safety regulations around driving trucks. One of them, for example, is that if you drive a truck in the United States, you must carry these safety flags. And then if your truck breaks down, you have to get out of the cab, walk around and put these flags behind your truck so everyone knows that this is a broken down truck and they don't crash into it. And the rules are very specific about how much time you have before you have to have these flags in place, and where you need to place them, how close to the truck and all that kind of thing. So companies that make these driverless trucks are going, well, this is a bit of a problem, because if we've got a truck without any people in it, how are we going to place these flags, right? The truck doesn't have hands. It can't get out and go and do this. So they've said, all right, well, that's fine, because what we can do is just come up with other things instead. So, for example, they've come up with this idea of having this big flashing light on top of the truck. So when the truck breaks down, it has a big flashing light, right, that you can't miss. But
that makes you crash into the truck because you can't see.
No, it's a warning, right? You got a warning. So, and that's fine. It's probably better than a flag, right? But no, not according to people who are generally objecting to the idea of driverless trucks. And these are, to be honest, a lot of the labour unions, because the labour unions are very worried that all the truck drivers are going to be out of a job. It's a very real fear. So they are opposing driverless trucks in every way they can. And this is one of the ways they've opposed it. So they've said, no, it's not the same. It won't be the same. It's not as good as a flag. It's not as good as actually having a human being who can place a flag. And one of the arguments they came up with, for example, is, what about if the truck's upside down? You wouldn't be able to see this flashing light. Which is rather strange arguments. You think, well, if the truck is upside down in the middle of the road, it's not like people aren't going to see it. There's an up, down, down truck in the middle of the road. People are going to see it. A little flag's not going to help. And obviously the companies make the argument, well, the flags are terrible anyway, because the driver has to get out in a busy highway and walk. You could get hit by a car. If it's windy, the flags blow over. You know, they're not very good. We've come up with better solutions. But no, and this is just illustration of this battle when it comes to health and safety regulations. Very often, it's not only about health and safety, it's about other things as well. And in this case, it's about the jobs of truck drivers.
Okay, so that truck example is really good. And I feel like there's a lot of examples like that right now that are all of these different industries trying to become more effective, have less people actually working these jobs. We have things like OSHA all around the world, and these are a really key player in making sure that workers that are in fact still doing the jobs don't, die while they're doing their job. Absolutely. But now we have this bill in Congress that essentially wants to get rid of OSHA entirely. So Stephen, what is the big idea behind the NOSHA Act?
Yes, so this bill, which has been reintroduced by Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona, is as straightforward as it gets. It's one simple sentence, a very, very short bill, and it has one goal, which is abolish OSHA. Literally, the entire text of the bill just says the Occupational Safe and Healthy Act of 1970 is repealed. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration is abolished. That's it. Job done.
Okay, so absolutely no frills, no details. This, I was going to say, is kind of a refreshing approach to a bill, because I feel like a lot of the bills we've been covering, we've been like, what does this bill actually say? And this one, it says what it says, but there's no details. So what does it mean? And it's just maybe a legislative mic drop. I'm not sure. But what is the reasoning behind this? Why are some of these lawmakers pushing to get rid of OSHA?
Well, it's an interesting story. The main argument, really, from the supporters who support this bill is that OSHA represents unnecessary federal overreach. So it's that very old story. States should be in charge of workplace safety regulations. It should be a state matter. It should not be a federal matter, as we hear so often with these bills. Congressman Biggs argues that states, not the federal government, are better positioned to set the safety rules that match their particular needs. One of the examples he cites is OSHA's heat regulations. He says that a national standard simply doesn't make sense because what's considered hot in Arizona isn't the same as in, say, Alaska. Very clear.
Okay.
The weather is very different. But of course, you could argue, well, in a workplace, hot is hot, right? It doesn't matter what state you're in. If your workplace is too hot for people to work, then that's the same in Arizona as it is in Alaska. Obviously, you'd have to approach it in very different ways. It's much more likely to be too hot in Arizona than in Alaska. But the actual temperature isn't different. What's comfortable to a human being is the same wherever you are.
Is there anything else kind of driving this push?
Oh, yes, there very much is. Cast your mind back a few years to 2020, and we had the pandemic. In fact, we just had over here the 5th anniversary of our lockdown. Quite a moment not to celebrate particularly. But this bill was originally introduced during the pandemic back in 2021 because OSHA was enforcing COVID-19 vaccination and testing mandates for large employers under the Biden administration. Now, the Biden administration introduced these rules, and they were eventually actually blocked by the Supreme Court. But for many conservatives, it really reinforced the idea that OSHA was this overreaching bureaucracy interfering with people's lives, and in particular, overruling what the states consider sensible within their particular states. And the NOSHA Act really was a reaction to that.
All right, got it. So it's a mix of states' rights arguments, which are more and more common, and lingering resentment over COVID regulations, which I also feel like are still becoming more and more common somehow.
They are. I don't know how we still keep talking about COVID regulations and mask mandates and vaccines and things. It's
we're stuck in a loop right now. Let's talk about the other side, because I imagine that there are some pretty strong reactions to the idea of completely getting rid of workplace safety enforcement.
Absolutely. Well, federal workplace safety enforcement, of course, not state level. So yes, there are vociferous opponents to this bill who are not mincing their words. So, for example, the National Consumer League has called it a catastrophic step backwards that would put workers at serious risk. And I mean, let's just have a look at some other numbers here. So since OSHA was founded, the various bits of research have estimated that about 700,000 lives have been saved due to its safety standards. And critics argue that without OSHA, companies would be free to cut corners on safety and maximize profits, which could lead to more workplace injuries and deaths. So it's really important. The idea of a level playing field when it comes to things like this are really important. If you've got, say, a business in New York that's trying to compete to produce a widget that's also being produced in Tennessee, those two companies will compete on very different things. They'll compete on, the quality, colors, their marketing, but they'll also compete on price. And so the one with the cheaper widget is likely to win the market. And how do you save money? Well, health and safety is expensive. So there's a huge temptation there for a state with lower levels of health and safety regulations to cut corners and compete. And there's all sorts of arguments you can make for that, saying, well, this is a silly rule anyway. It's fine. No one's going to get hurt. And by winning in this particular economic battle, we'll be able to employ more people. We'll be able to give people more salaries. The state will become more prosperous. It's very difficult to argue against that, as you see all the time. So that's why it is really important, according to the critics of this bill, that you have that minimum floor level set by the federal government, and states are not allowed to go beneath that.
Okay, so it's not just about deaths. It's also about injury, chemical exposure, even child labor laws. And there's a lot of opposing groups that say that this isn't just going to make it more dangerous, but it's also really going to disproportionately affect the most vulnerable workers. Like you said, between New York and Tennessee, there's lower income and minority workers in different areas. There's different ways that those states kind of handle even income taxes and salaries and wages and cost of living. Also, these low income and minority workers often are in jobs with industries that have higher injury rates. And
Absolutely.
you do need these adequate protections. So it kind of sounds like this is a classic debate of regulation versus deregulation, except instead of arguing about tax policies, we're arguing about workplace safety. Are there any states that are also trying to make moves on this issue outside of the NOSHA Act?
There are not very many, actually. It's just a handful of bills. Because basically it's been around for so long and everyone accepts the fact that OSHA sort of deals with this situation. I don't think the states feel the need to do an enormous amount here. But there are some state bills that are in legislatures across the country right now that are dealing with workplace safety. So, for example, Michigan's SB 49 is working to modernize the state's safety laws and bring them in line with federal standards. And on the other side, you've got Oregon's HB 3778, which would actually weaken state safety regulations, making it illegal for the state to adopt rules stricter than federal OSHA standards. And you've got Kentucky, where Democrats are actually pushing to eliminate a provision that effectively caps protection at the federal level. So you can see that the bills here tends to jockey around.
Yeah.
Should the regulations in our states be stricter, more stringent than, and therefore perhaps safer than this minimum floor that OSHA sets? They're not really saying let's go beneath that because they're currently not allowed to. If you get rid of OSHA, though, where would these bills go?
That's really fascinating, actually. Okay, so depending on the state, you're either pushing for stronger workplace safety laws or you're kind of moving to weaken them. But stepping back for a second, what are the actual chances of NOSHA passing at the federal level?
Well, honestly, pretty slim, really.
Okay.
Right now, the bill doesn't have any co-sponsors, so it's not exactly gaining traction, even among Republicans. And there's not a huge appetite, it seems, for completely eliminating OSHA. At least not at the moment, though. But of course, this current administration is doing some pretty radical stuff. So you can never write these things off because it is the sort of thing that you can imagine appealing to a government that is looking to deregulate quite aggressively in the way that the Trump administration is.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe there's not a huge appetite because the legislatures don't want to deal with the chaos that would be instituting the right rules at the state level. They're like, you know what, just keep it. That's too much work. That's too much craziness. We don't want to deal with that. We're fine with the federal preemption for now. But, it's more of a statement than a real shot at becoming law. But like you said, who knows? Yes,
exactly. So at the moment, certainly it's about sending a message. And that's why the legislature is obviously reintroducing the bill, as they tend to do. But we've got to be careful here that we don't see another shift of this Overton window that we keep talking about. Then all of a sudden, something that just seems a little bit ridiculous, to be frank, suddenly enters the realm of, well, maybe we should consider that. Maybe there's something in it. And then you end up with more bills that aren't quite as extreme as this one, but that do lay the groundwork for future efforts to scale back OSHA's power through smaller legislative changes. And the kind of thing you see a lot of course, is targeting individual rules and regulations and actually disapplying those or changing them and modifying them and putting pressure on the various agencies to do that. And therefore sort of generally lower workplace safety standards.
Okay, so that makes sense. So bottom line, OSHA is here for now, but the debate over workplace safety regulations isn't going anywhere. And if you're listening and wondering what's happening in your state, you can go check out the NOSHA Act on Bill Track 50 and click similar bills and see this related legislation.
And as always, let us know what you think. Should OSHA stay or go? Are state level regulations enough? Or do we actually need a federal agency to keep workers safe? Drop us a comment, subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.
And don't forget to keep looking beyond the bill number.